Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 520. Today we're going to take a look at Dungeon Busters. This is being brought over to the United States by Mayday Games. It's originally a Korean published game from Dive Dice. So this will be out at Gen Con and around about that time as well elsewhere. This is a very light kind of filler game where players have identical sets of cards that they're going to be playing. They just have numeric values. And then you're kind of bidding on treasure, trying to fight off monsters and add different kind of power values to kind of this changing treasure pool. So let's jump into the mechanics. They're really simple, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. Okay, here you can see all the components that you get in the game. I will note that the basic game or the standard game comes with these cardboard chits for the different gems. The publisher Mayday has a little gem pack you can get that has these sort of nicer crystal looking acrylic gems there. And so the idea is to collect the most of these gems. But let's talk about the scoring actually first, and then we'll talk about the mechanics. So to start the game, each of you are going to get one of the three different types of gem. We've got red, yellow, and blue. And so at the end of the game, each gem is worth 1 point. However, for each set that you have, so one of each type, you get 3 points. So this is worth 6 points. 1, 2, 3 plus 3 for having one of each. So if you had multiple sets, they'd each be worth 6. The other thing that you're trying to score at the end of the game is have the most of a particular color. So if I had the most blues, let's say I had 3 blues and that was the most, which is possible, but not usually, then you get an extra 3 points for having the most blues. If there's a tie for the most, then nobody gets any points for that. And that is a rule change from the Korean edition. If you've played that one, it didn't have the rule where you scored for the most of a certain color. So like I said, everybody gets one of each, and then you're going to play the game over a different number of rounds. Now, one player is going to randomly get this little start player marker. They're kind of the leader of this party of adventurers that are going into the dungeon. That will stay with them for the remainder of the game. And then you have 1, 2, 3 decks of dungeon cards. Now, no matter the number of players, you're going to shuffle this up. You're going to remove one card out of the game without looking at it, and you're going to do that for each of these decks. And then you're going to flip over the first card. And so the first thing that we're going to encounter here is a chimera. There's a couple of things to notice. You can see it's got a strength of 14. And then I'll explain this in a little bit more detail, but it's sort of first place gets 2 reds, second place gets a yellow, and then third place gets a blue. It's not quite like that, but let's explain how a round actually works. Now, each player will choose a class or character, so that you can choose the mage here. And depending on the number of players, you're going to take out certain cards. So if you're playing with 3 players, everybody will remove the 1 card from their deck. If you're playing with 4 or 5 players, you remove the 7 card from the deck. So let's just take that out. And then everybody has, again, the identical set of cards. And then for each dungeon monster that comes up, everybody's going to take a card, and then we're going to put it face down, and then everybody is going to reveal them simultaneously. So I did this completely randomly, and so then we're going to take a look. So now we've got here 12, 13. 6 plus 6 is 12 plus 13, which is not enough to equal 14. So let's say the blue player wasn't stingy and he had this would equal 14. However, there's a couple of rules with that. If the players ever play the same card, this cancels each other out. So these are considered basically 0. So anybody that plays the same card as another player, and this can happen more often with more players obviously, then you will cancel that and will be a 0. However, let's say the yellow player here played a 7 instead. So he had a 6, a 7, and a 2, and this will be 15. So this is enough to equal or be greater than the chimera. Now in this case, we have enough to beat it. So whoever played the lowest card, however, gets this extra special reward. So in this case, blue would get 2 red gems, and that would go into their supply. And then second place is moving up from the lowest would be red. They would get a yellow, and then third place would get a blue. And then you would go on to the next card. And so the next one here would be a mimic. And you can see here we need at least a strength of 10. And first place gets 1 of each, which could be very tasty. And then second place would get a blue. So what happens though if you don't beat it? So for example, let's say we played it like so. So these 2 6s, they cancel each other out. Well, the total in this case is only 2, because these are 0 and this is 2. And in this case, we need 10. So what happens in a case where you don't have enough to meet it is each player who played the lowest card, in that case it's only blue because he played a 2, And then they have to take the gem that they have the most of. So let's say blue had 3 yellows and then 1 of each other gem. They would take the one that they have the most of, and then they would put that on the spoil. So they would get sort of penalized for contributing the least, and we didn't succeed. So you can see this is sort of a balance between, oh, I want to go in really low because I want to get usually that first reward because it's a little bit better. But I don't want to go too low because, you know, then if we don't succeed, then I might be one of the people putting in gems here. And so you're going to do that for the next card. In this case, this will be a very low one. This will be a value of 4, but you only get 1 blue gem out of it. And then we do the final card for this particular dungeon. So we've got a skeleton here, 7, and so on. So as players are playing their cards, each of these rounds, you're going to leave the cards face up, like so. And then after we do the 4th card, then we're going to pick up all the cards back into our hand, and then we're going to go back into level 2. And these don't necessarily get harder, it's just kind of a reset of the spread. And so here we can see this is a 5 and you only get 1. So basically every 4 cards, you're going to pick up the cards that you've already played and then have a chance to have all the cards at your disposal to play again. Now, if somebody wins, in this case, let's say there were some gems here from previous rounds. Let's say we had a bunch of blues and yellows here. And then this one you think, oh, well, it's not going to be that valuable because there's only going to be the 1 red gem. However, if there were a bunch of losses right before this is going to fill up with gems. So this is going to be actually very valuable because on top of this, players will be able to gather from the spoils, whatever's on here. And the way that works is if you succeeded and defeating whatever the current monster is, then again, whoever has the lowest is going to get first choice of the gem. So they'll take that gem, and then the second lowest will take another gem, and then on and around. Now, if you were ever eliminated because you played the identical card, so if yellow and red had both played 6s, so they had 0, they don't get to get anything, obviously, because they're at 0. They don't get anything from this card or from the spoils. So in this case, it could be very feasible, you know, that maybe these 2 players, this is an example play, they each play a 6, and then blue plays a 5 all by themselves. And so these 2 cancel each other out, and then the 5 here is enough to beat that by itself. So they would take the red gem plus everything that was on the spoils of that. He was the only one in play there. So there's a kind of balancing act between, you know, using your really good, quote unquote, low cards to steal when the pot is big. You know, when you get a nice monster like this mimic here who's going to give you, you know, 1 of each, which is 6 points, or when this kind of builds up and maybe you collect a whole bunch of a certain kind. So that is the game. You play through, let's see, 12 rounds, because there's going to be 4 cards in each. You always take 1 out of this deck, so you don't know exactly what's in there. And then again, whoever has the most points at the end is going to get, they'll be the winner. Okay, so that is Dungeon Busters. As you can see, it's very simple. There's a lot of kind of guessing, you could say, with this. You know, okay, am I going to play the 2? Well, Billy and Francesca, they haven't played their 2 yet, so I've got to be very careful because the chances that I clash with them on that number is pretty high. But if the example was Billy and Francesca had both played their 2s, then I'm safe with the 2. So at that point, you can kind of get into a little bit of the metagame because you can try to sabotage it and say, okay, well, we know Joel's going to play the 2, so, you know, we're going to try to play the same card. You could have some collusion with that to sort of sabotage it, and so I played the low card even though you guys played a higher 6s that were the matching one, and then that would force me to give up my gems. The rule that we play with that approach is that there's no discussion about the number. But you can say, you could say, okay, well, we both know we have the 4, 5, and 6, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's the only kind of real wonky thing, but that's just going to be group dependent. I mean, to me, that would be cheating. And I could see, because there's nothing that I could do about it as the player with the 2. So we would say there's no discussion about the cards that you play, and they just have to sort of guess that they would play the same card to try to sabotage it. That came up one time because it was a really tight game, and we'd played it a bunch of times, and we were getting kind of cutthroat with it. But it's really neat because it is simple. But you have that kind of thing. So if like the low guy comes out here and he just gives you the 1 red gem, it's like, well, I'm going to throw away my 7 because, you know, I want to keep the low cards to try to stay involved. But if you have 2 people thinking like that, they're both going to bail out on it. So again, the other player who plays the low card might have to give up all their gems because you couldn't even beat the lowly 5, you know, defense creature. So it's kind of a mind game thing. And then as you sort of start to see the cards that are played, you start to guess. You give like a 50-50 shot. Does a 3 work? Or does a 4 work? That kind of stuff. So it's pretty fun, and it's cool to see kind of the pot change a little bit. I played a couple of games like this. Raj was a very old game. Don't go look for it. But it's kind of like this, where you have this sort of depleting, knowable set of cards that you're using to kind of bid. High Society is another one by Reiner Knizia, which I would recommend that one. Raj I like too, but Raj you can't find, and you probably maybe spend too much money on it. And then 12 Days of Christmas and Eggs and Empires, another couple games like that. This is cool. I think this adds something a little, different, a little slight twist on this kind of game, which I tend to enjoy. I like the sort of surprise of it. Oh, we played the same card. Crap. Now we both have to put in a whole bunch of gems, and now the next pot's going to be huge, and you've got to sort of play around that. They're really quick games. They're like 10, 15-minute games, but you can play it several times in an hour if you really want to. So I like this style of game with sort of deduction, sort of guessing kind of thing. So I would recommend it. It's certainly nothing home to write about in terms of strategy, but it is a very nice, fun filler, and these extra gems do make it kind of fun to play too. So that is Dungeon Busters, and check it out at Gen Con if you are going there. Thanks.